question one, I'll introduce my interview subjects. Eileen Iaconia was an older cousin close to my parents' age. She's a wife and mother of adult children and a grandmother as well. She's lived her entire life in a town called Haledon, New Jersey, and is a secretary holding several different positions throughout her career. Rebecca Spar is a 19-year-old sophomore at the University of Tennessee. Rebecca grew up mainly in Frankfurt, Germany before moving to Dayton, Tennessee when she was about 13 years old. As a child, Eileen remembers it was her father that would discuss racism and prejudice with her, and he always tried to impress upon her the golden rule on respecting and loving everybody. For Rebecca, she doesn't remember the subject really ever coming up because Frankfurt was a very culturally diverse area. She said the only time it may have come up was during religion class because the student body at her school had a high percentage of Muslim students. For question 3, Eileen said it wasn't so much the unwritten rules, but the verbal rules that her mother impressed upon her on one occasion. She had met a Hispanic boy she really liked, but her mother forbid her to date, and Eileen was very confused, and it was direct contradiction to what her father always told her about respecting and loving everyone. Although Eileen didn't go against her parents' wishes, it was something that always angered and confused her. For Rebecca, she said the rules were a little more unwritten, mainly because she was raised by her grandparents in Frankfurt, and although they were very loving and accepting, she knew that when it was time for her to start dating, that they would want her to pick someone that was closer to their religion and their race as they were. Eileen said one of the first times she encountered someone who was different than her, she was a little girl on the playground. She went over to the swing set and encountered a girl who she said was a mongoloid. Of course, today we use the term Down syndrome. She had never seen somebody like that before, didn't know if it was contagious, if it was a disease, if the girl was going to hurt her, and she was very scared. She never went over to the swing, she just hung back and looked at her, and she remembered going home later, and eventually her mother explained to her what the little girl's condition was. Eileen was relieved and sad at the same time, relieved that it wasn't anything that was dangerous or hurtful, but then sad at the same time. She felt that it was silly because she could have definitely swung next to the little girl or even spoken to her and have not been afraid, and she said that she was even a little embarrassed and ashamed of herself. For Rebecca, she said she really didn't remember a time encountering anybody that was so different from her that they stuck out because she lived in such a culturally diverse area. Everyone was unique and special in their own way, and no one person really stuck out. Thinking about events in their lifetime, Eileen recalled a time when she was young. There were race riots in the town of Paterson, New Jersey, that was very close to where she lives. The one thing that stuck out in her mind was the adults in the community that she felt were supposed to be the sensible and rational people were really perpetuating a lot of terror against the situation, which was already a horrible situation, but they were making it much worse than what it was. And even, to the children, impressing upon them, don't go down into Paterson if you're white, the black people will beat you up. Make sure you lock your doors at night or the black people will come and kill your family. And Eileen said this affected her for a very long time. Looking up to adults that were supposed to be calming in a sense of rationality really kind of had a lot of hysteria, which made her nervous and look at people a whole different way. And for Rebecca, she lived in Frankfurt at the time of 9/11, and her brother's best friend was Muslim. A lot of the students were kind of provoking him and even questioning her brother. How could he be friends with someone whose family, quote-unquote, flew planes into the Twin Towers? Rebecca said it was very sad that these students were starting, to try to provoke a fight between the two boys, and they could not separate the actions of a few terrorists and this boy. They just kind of lumped him in with a group that of murderers, and she was very sad and felt very bad for her brother and the boy. Personal events that influenced her thinking: Eileen had to amend a previous comment she made about her father being liberal as far as he had friends of many different races and cultures, mainly through his workplace. But she did realize that he harbored a lot of racism against people of the Jewish faith. He worked for a company that was owned by a Jewish family, and whenever he made negative comments about the company, he always had to add something about the Jewish religion, so he could never separate the people from the religion. So she admitted that he probably did have a lot of prejudice against people of the Jewish faith. Rebecca, she remembers being on a school trip. There were a lot of Muslim students on the trip, and this was the first time she really got to see firsthand a lot of the prayer rituals that they do throughout the day. There was one girl in particular, although she did not vocalize that she was struggling with her faith and did everything that she was supposed to do, did not seem as passionate and devoted as the other people did. And Rebecca always assumed, she said it was kind of silly, she always assumed that if you were Muslim, you had to be extremely dedicated and passionate to your faith. But here was a girl who, although she kind of assumed that she was struggling, she looked at her in a different light and realized, what, she's not just a Muslim girl, she's just a girl, and she could possibly be struggling just like anybody else could be struggling with their faith. And it's the first time she really looked at her as an individual and kind of made a disconnect with the Muslim faith. Question 7, Eileen said that she did the same thing her father did, was basically try to impress upon her children to treat everyone with respect and treat everyone equally and not to judge. For Rebecca, she hoped to educate her children of other races and cultures through travel, although she did mention that when it was time for them to date or be married, she hoped, although she would accept anybody and love anybody into their family, she hoped that they picked someone that was the same religion and the same race as they were. For question number 8, Eileen felt that the private prejudice in the U.S. had improved a whole lot, especially in the case of gay people being able to marry in certain states. Rebecca thought that it had gotten a little bit better. She did mention, gay people being able to marry in states, but she said that she also felt a lot of people just got a whole lot better about hiding their prejudice. And although she felt the quantity of prejudice was basically the same, it had shifted from certain groups to other groups. So the quantity stayed the same, but it was just directed at different cultural groups. For question 9, Eileen said her community definitely had the most influence on her views of diversity, and for Rebecca it was her peers, although she did mention her family, in particular her grandparents. For question number 10, Eileen said the best thing she could do is be a good role model for her grandson and have him follow in her footsteps and just be accepting and loving of everyone. And Rebecca said that her responsibility is just to act the same way she would every single day and not judge anybody by their race or religion, color of their skin, gender, sexual preference, or anything that makes them unique. And for question number 11, Eileen and Rebecca both agreed that education was probably the best course of action. They noted that a lot of schools have bullying programs in place, and they thought maybe programs on prejudice that would open the lines of communications for students and teachers and adults would also be a positive thing to have in the schools. Things that I took away from these interviews was the fact that Eileen, just because she's been around a whole lot longer, felt the issues of prejudice and racism has gotten a whole lot better in the U.S., where the younger generation doesn't really feel that it's gotten a whole lot better. So hopefully when they're older, they can look back and agree that maybe it's gotten a whole lot better. And also, as far as communication, of course, the younger generation is more open to communication, and hopefully they're communicating with their parents. Eileen made a comment that when she was younger, parents really didn't discuss serious issues with their children. In fact, if you overheard anything and asked questions, most of the time you were met with, well, this is an adult conversation, it doesn't concern you. So she said it would be helpful a lot of times going into situations to have advanced knowledge and not learn things after the fact, just like when she met saw the little girl with Down syndrome on the swing. But again, that just wasn't the case when she was a young child, where the younger generation knows a lot more of the world by open lines of communication. They have that ability, and they have that knowledge going into situations, so I think that helps them a lot. And for the third thing, Eileen said a lot of her peers adopt the philosophy that I don't care what you do as long as it doesn't hurt me or affect me, you can do whatever you want. And she said it's kind of, they're not accepting certain behaviors or condoning them, but it's their way of just kind of saying, oh, I really don't care. Where Rebecca felt that her generation was more open to learning and understanding, and not just, turning their head and not accepting it, but just saying, oh, whatever. They were really, interested in learning and interested in understanding and trying to take it a step further. So she felt that the younger generation was more curious not just more tolerant, but more curious and learning as a way of understanding as well.